Good morning, everybody. Carmen here with Quality Sewing and Vacuum. For this week's How Do I series, we are talking about how do I use these quilting tools to make my quilting better, easier, all of those things. There's so many great tools out there and notions and accessories that can really help your quilting, your embroidery, your serging, all those things. And today we're going to take a little time and I'm going to talk through some of my favorite tools and accessories that I use almost every time I sit down and quilt. So you can see here I have sort of a whole bunch of different things on this table, but we are going to start with like the very first thing in quilting. I guess the very first thing is you have to pick a pattern. I don't know about you, but I always want to pick I always want lots of patterns, right? Because one of my favorite parts of quilting is picking that pattern and then picking from all of the gorgeous fabric and just, making it really my own. But the next step, of course, is you're going to cut it out and then you're going to sew it together. So the first thing that I want to talk about is some of my favorite sewing feet, or really quilting feet, that I don't think I would quilt without them. So you can see here, I'm in front of this Brother machine here, and right now I have a stitch in the ditch foot on, but I'm going to take it off here and we're going to start with a 1/4 inch foot. So these Brother feet just snap on and off, which is really handy. You can see here, this is the 1/4 inch foot, and there's a little picture of it here. The 1/4 inch foot is amazing because it has there's a couple of different versions of the 1/4 inch foot. This is my favorite version because it has this metal flange here. So the way this works is I just snap this foot on here, and then I'm going to grab 2 pieces of fabric, and we'll just pretend that I am going to, start piecing. So I'm going to line these 2 up on the edge, and I'm going to slide them in here, and then I'm going to, I'll start at the beginning, and I'm just going to lower my pressure foot, and what I want this little metal flange lined right up to the edge here. And the other thing is you'll notice that this was a straight stitch foot. I don't know if you noticed that, but it's a straight stitch foot, meaning that we can't do a zigzag with it. Our needle must be in the middle straight stitch position. So I'm going to go over to my machine, and this particular machine defaults with your needle in the left position. So I'm going to go over and make sure that my needle is in the straight stitch position, so that way I don't break a needle. And then I'm good with my stitch length and stitch width, and I'm just going to start it here. And I'm going to slow it down a little bit. You can see here as we're going how I just keep my fabric lined up against that flange, and I'm going to cut my threads here. Guess what? I get a perfect 1/4 inch. And what I love about this is it makes it a lot faster for me to piece, because since there's the flange here, I just keep my fabric lined right up, and I think about it sort of like driving, where you don't want to look super close. You want to look at just the flange that's closest to you. Don't look at your needle, just look at that flange, and you can just zip through and you are going to get a more perfect 1/4 inch every time. And there's a couple of different types of this foot on the market. Some of them are clear, some of them are metal, some have the flange and some do not have the flange. I much prefer one that has the little flange because it helps me sew straighter every time, and I feel like I need all the help I can get in that area, and I like to sew really fast, so the more that that foot can help me, the better. So now that I have this, we'll just pretend this was we'll flip this over here. Now let's say, I'm gonna pull out these little loose strings. They don't look super good there, but let's just pretend this was my quilt, sort of like how I had my quilt on when we first started. My next favorite foot is the stitch in the ditch foot, okay? And you can see here, stitch in the ditch foot. And I'm using the baby lock feet on the Brother machine, which works great. But all of these feet that I am talking about, all of the different brands have a variation. Bernina, Baby Lock, Brother, Juki, Gnome, Burnett, Pfaff, Viking, they all are going to have a foot that works in this manner, and that are called these same names. So let's the stitch in the ditch foot here. I'm going to slide this guy on, snap him on here. And the same deal, the stitch in the ditch foot is also a straight stitch foot. And part of the reason why so many of these feet are straight stitch feet, and if we look at the 1/4 inch one again here, there's only a hole really big enough for your straight stitch. It gives you a little bit of room, so that way if you want a scant 1/4 inch, for example, if we go back to the 1/4 inch foot, you can move it, you can still bump your needle one position each direction. But when you have a smaller opening here, it's going to give you a straighter, prettier stitch every time. So here when we go, so this would be, normally if you were going to use your stitch in the ditch foot, you would have a sandwich here, which I should have built, but I didn't quite, but we're just going to do it like this, where you would have your batting and you'd have your backing. And so when you wanted to actually quilt, like earlier I had this quilt up here, so if you wanted to actually do the stitch in the ditch quilting on your whole quilt, right, once you have all 3 pieces together, this guy is amazing. So I'm just gonna lower my presser foot here, and then there's this middle flange there, and I'm just gonna start going, and I'm just gonna keep that middle flange lined up right down that seam. And what's beautiful about this is it is gonna keep me straight and right in the seam between my 2 pieces of fabric. So you can see there, see how beautiful that is? Awesome and easy, and all because I'm using the stitch in the ditch foot. So the next foot, let me pull this guy off. Anyway, this one I love. I am not super good at doing free motion quilting. I do it sometimes, but stitching the ditch is just so easy, and this foot makes it easy. And once again, sort of like with that 1/4 inch foot, don't look at where your needle is, look at where this flange is, and that will keep you straight down that seam. Okay, so the next foot that I want to put on here is the open toe foot. Do you have a question?
No, we have a very funny comment.
Yes.
So Diana said, Carmen, may the 1/4 be with you.
May the 1/4 be with you.
She's like, I love that foot. So I thought that was hilarious.
That is awesome. We should make like that would be a fun thing to put on social. I like that one. Thank you. Okay, so here, this is the open toe foot. So this open toe foot here, this foot is clear, and there's metal versions of the open toe foot, and there are plastic ones. I prefer the plastic ones because I want to have as much visibility as possible. And so when I go over here and I snap on my open toe foot, this open toe foot is really helpful if, let's say, I'm appliquing. So let's just pretend that I was appliquing this, right? And I wanted to make sure that I was keeping my stitch right here, going right over what I was appliquing. So maybe I'll go over here and I'll pick and add different stitch, something that maybe is a bit better for an applique or just a decorative stitch. We'll just pick this stitch here, and then I'm going to start, and then I am just going to try to just keep that little red line lined up, and so that way my pattern here is going to go straight over those 2 seams. So this can be great for applique, this can be great when you're joining seams, this can be great for decorative stitching. Anytime when you want to have more visibility, to make sure it's going to be right where you want to see it, you can see how when you have this open toe foot, this is like a standard, the standard foot that comes with the Brother, and even though it's a clear front here, you still have a little bit of something blocking. It's not as easy. I love how there's the little red mark there, and it really, it's great for applique, for decorative stitching, or just anytime you're doing something where you want to have more visibility. I sometimes, sometimes I'll use it if I've marked on my quilt and I want to follow something. There's lots of different applications. It's just a great foot to have in your stash of feet.
So does the foot come in a 9mm as well?
You are just reading my mind. I was literally just thinking, should I talk about the difference between 9mm and 7mm open toe feet? So yes, if you have like the Pfaff and the Vikings, they have our 9mm machines. And there's some other 9mm machines. So most brands who have 9mm machines, like Pfaff for example, they make an open toe foot in 9mm and in 6mm. But I will give you a pro tip. The 9mm is great if you are doing an actual stitch that is 9mm. However, if you are doing a stitch that is 6mm or less, even if your machine is a 9mm machine, I'd highly recommend also having a 6mm open toe foot. And the reason for that is that because the 6mm open toe foot is a little bit smaller, it actually gives you some more stability, and it really sews beautifully. And most of us who have 9mm machines have both the 9mm and the 6mm, and when we're just doing a narrower stitch, most of us prefer to use the 6mm one. So there is the sort of long answer to, is there a 9mm? The one that we're standing in front of here is a 7mm because Brother and Baby Locks are mostly 7mm machines, but for every brand, their open toe foot is going to work with the opening space that those machines have.
She was actually referring to the stitch in the ditch foot for the 9mm.
Yes, so the stitch in the ditch foot is going to be different. It's a little different depending on each of the brands. So like the stitch in the ditch foot, that the Brother Baby Lock one just has a smaller opening here. Some of the other stitch in the ditches have a little bit more space, but there's not you know what I would look at is the edge joining foot. If you want a foot that has more space there than a stitch in the ditch foot, since stitch in the ditch is usually for quilting, they're normally thinking about straight stitching. But I believe that the edge joining foot that also has the flange on the side is open, so you can do a wider stitch, which I imagine that's why you would want a more of a 9mm one, as opposed to one that just basically has a spot for a straight stitch. Okay, and also pro tip here, if your brand does not have a stitch in the ditch foot, the edge joining foot will work as a stitch in the ditch foot, and is what many of us used for years before they came out with stitch in the ditch feet. So the edge joining foot also works like a stitch in the ditch foot. The new stitch in the ditch feet have more markings on them. So you can see here they have markings for turning corners and things. Actually, that's actually the 1/4 inch foot, but the stitch in the ditch foot, they have more markings for turning corners, and they have the straight stitch, so they're designed more for quilting, but the edge joining foot will also work. Okay, let's see here. Oh wait, I have a couple more feet, I forgot. Got on a sidetrack there talking about different types of feet. Okay, so the other 2 feet that I wanted to just talk about are the free motion quilting feet. So I'll pop this guy out here. And the free motion quilting foot, this foot is great. And I have 2 versions here because this is an open toe free motion foot, meaning that it doesn't have, there's nothing there. And then this is just a free motion foot that's clear. So, and it just depends on personal preference. I sort of like the open toe one, but I just like to really see what's happening all the time with my needle. And other people really prefer having a closed toe that's clear. So it just sort of depends on you. But what the open toe or the closed toe free motion quilting foot, you can see it sort of bounces here. And this is what you're going to do if you were going to do like some sort of free motion, right? If you were going to draw your own, if you're going to do the free motion squiggles, those sorts of things, that's really where this foot comes in handy. You're going to lower your feed dogs, and then you're going to do your free motion and make your pretty pictures and all of those things, because the feed dogs aren't pushing your fabric forward. You're doing all of that driving. And I'd highly recommend, if you're going to play with one of these feet, don't try it the first time on your project. If you aren't familiar with free motion, I would definitely get it on and do some testing and sort of play with what you think you might want to do, and relax and play with it. Because free motion is a little bit of an art form. It's not hard. I tend to just do lots of little twirly-doos because that seems to work better for me. And everybody sort of finds what works for them. But what's going to help you do that is one of these free motion quilting feet. And like I said before, they have them for all brands. Okay, and then finally, I guess the last thing that's happening here that is helpful is having an extension table of some form on your machine, either having your sewing machine in the cabinet where you're going to have a big flush surface, or if you have an extension table, like how the extension table is on here, that is going to help you, because as you can see, I've had all this lovely surface space to set things at a flush height as I've been talking with you. This is also just a very helpful accessory to have. So let's keep going here and talk a little bit more about, I've got a lot more goodies on my table here. So the first one, I don't know how many of you have been noticing this really adorable pillow behind me. This is a super fun applique pillow. It's called Gnome is Where You Park It. I think this was on So Fun a couple of months ago, but it is super fun. But you'll notice that this is all applique. And so using that open toe foot that we talked about would make it really easy to do this applique. But the other thing about applique is that oftentimes you need a good pair of scissors to help you trim that applique. Here's this pattern just so you sort of know, in case you're loving that, what it's called. And so one of the things that I brought out are these great, these are the Quilter Select Wave applique scissors. And what makes these really unique is this point here. Because we have a lot of duckbill, which is what this is called, a duckbill scissor, because the way it pops out here. There are quite a few duckbill scissors on the market that are just a normal straight point, and those work great. But this one adds an extra piece of using, it's going to help you out, is this little curved point. And what's great about this is it gives you that point of a more traditional scissor, so you can do some fussy cutting, but then it still has that duckbill. So if you were going to get in here and trim it here, you can see how the duckbill, and actually you could do it the other way too, but you can see how the duckbill gets in there and really helps with your really helps you not, you can trim close, but not trim too close, if that makes sense. So you can use it either side, and then when you need to, you can get in there and really just fussy cut around. Like if I wanted to really get in there around something, you can see how that point really gives me the ability to fussy cut, if that makes sense. And then the cool thing about these is not only do they come in a right-hand version, they also come in a left-handed version. And sometimes it's hard on some of the specialty scissors because they don't always have a left-handed version. But Quilter Select has done a great job with that. And in case you're not familiar with the Quilter Select brand, we're going to talk about a couple more of her things. But Alex Anderson, who is a quilter, she has designed this brand for R&K, and R&K is the company that makes Floriani and some other really great products that we carry. And we have really been championing the Quilter Select brand because what's great is Alex has created all the things that she wished she had always had, and has created them, and she quilts day in and day out, and so these are tools that are super helpful. So these are what are called the Wave Applique scissors, really great for applique. Okay, so maybe we'll talk about a couple other Quilter Select items since we are talking about that brand. So I have quite a few different Quilter Select items over here. So we're just gonna jump around a little bit and we're gonna talk about some basics for quilting. So some of the basics are needles and thread. And I'm sure you've heard this a lot of times, but in case this information is new for you, I know sometimes people don't know the differences between needles, but we have a lot of different, we carry lots of different brands of needles. We have the Class A needles, we have the Inspira needles, and then we have the Floriani needles that are by Schmetz. And we carry all very good quality needles, but there's also a lot of different types of needles, right? There's a universal needle, there's a denim needle, there's a stretch stitch needle, and I'm holding in front of me here the quilting needle. And I just want to tell you a little bit about what makes the quilting needle unique. So a universal needle point is a tiny bit rounded. And a sharp needle or a quilting needle has a sharper point. And the idea behind this sharper point is that it's going to pierce through either when you're piecing, it's going to pierce nicer, but it's really designed for when you have all three layers of fabric, your top, your batting, and your back. So you can pierce through that fabric a lot more nicely and have it just work better. So how many of you know the tip for how often you should change your needles? I would recommend every 8 hours of sewing or at the start of each project. The other telltale sign, some fabrics dull needles faster than others. Sometimes you get a bad needle, but if you are skipping stitches, if all of a sudden your machine sounds louder, like there's more clicking, those can be signs that your needle is dull. And when your needle is dull, it is not puncturing the fabric quite as quickly, right? And so that's the reason why it skips stitches, right? It's trying, and then skip a stitch, and then it gets back in it, and then trying, and it skips a stitch. And so those are signs of it's time to change your needle. I always, try to change at the beginning of a project, because there's nothing worse than being like in your groove, like free motion quilting or something, and realize that you need a new needle, because you don't want to stop, right? You just want to get all set up and go when you're sitting down and sewing. And then I also, when I'm quilting, I do use these quilting needles, and they're really handy, and they come in different sizes depending on the weight of the fabric. So they have, the 7511 or the 8012, which is the most common size. There's the 9014, which is a little bit heavier. Those are probably the two most common sizes, and those are the two sizes that I would recommend trying if you've never tried these, but they're very helpful. Okay, next, thread. We talked about needles, now let's talk about thread. So there are lots of threads out there, and at Quality Sewing we try to carry really high quality thread because we know that quality thread, there's a couple of things about quality thread that just make our sewing easier. One, it's a lot less fuzzy. So the quality thread is not going to have so much fuzz, it's not going to jam up your bobbin case and stuff with all that fuzz. It also is going to have more consistent dye lots, meaning that when you come back to get another spool of that thread, it's going to be pretty close to the spool that you had last time in color. The color variation should be very minor if there is between the different dye lots. And then also, just the way it lays on the fabric and how your machine performs, right? Oftentimes, our machines are going to perform better if we're using good quality fabric, and you're going to break threads less. So I have a couple of different threads here. There's all sorts of different types of quilting threads. Quilter Select, which is that Alex Anderson brand, she has some quilting threads. She has a 60 weight thread, which is the one that I use more often, and an 80 weight thread. So if you're not familiar with weights of thread, let's talk about what they mean. So the smaller the number, the thicker the thread. So, and the bigger the number, the finer the thread. So the 60 weight is actually a little bit thicker compared to an 80 weight. The 80 weight Quilter Select thread is really gorgeous if you really don't want to see your thread as much because you want it to blend in a bit more. Or if you're doing something on really fine fabric and you want a lighter weight thread, very nice to have an 80 weight thread. 60 and 50 weight are the more common quilting weights. Those are the more common, like sewing weight of thread would be 50 or 60. So she has a lovely line here of this beautiful Quilter Select thread. And I think, what's it called? It has a name, Perfect Cotton Plus. There we go. Perfect Cotton Plus is the 60 weight. But we also carry the Aurifil. And Aurifil is a beautiful quilting thread. It's 100% cotton, and this is a 50 weight thread, and we carry this at all of the store locations, and this is very popular among the quilters. And then we also have King Tut. In the large cones, you'll notice that I have a couple of different large cones here because it can also be really handy if you know you're going to be doing a lot of quilting. It can be really handy to just get a large cone of the color that you're going to use, and if you're going to use a large cone on a home machine like this, then you do want to put a one of those thread stands. If you're going to use a big cone, you're probably going to put it on a thread stand that sits behind your machine and then thread it up. Some of these machines have a big thread stand that you can put at the top of the machine. It just depends on the machine. And then we also have this. This is the Madero Aero Quilt thread, and then and that thread, the Aero Quilt thread, is actually polyester. It is not cotton. So as a quilter, you can choose if you want to use 100% cotton thread, or if you want to use polyester thread, or if you want to use a blend of cotton and polyester. Traditionally, I think it was always you had to use 100% cotton, but I think that, like everything, you should do what works for you. I oftentimes will use a polyester thread when I'm piecing. So it just depends on what's going to work for you. But we have lots of different threads, and then I do think these are super fun, the variegated ones. This isn't really a tip, this is just fun preference, right? It can be fun when you are doing all that free motion quilting to use a variegated color, because then you get a little bit of different colors all over. And we have quite a few of different ones, which is really why I pulled these guys out so you can see variegated or solid, all of those things. So the next thing about thread is bobbins. So I don't know about you, but I think the thing that I dislike the most, maybe not, I don't know, is when I run out of a bobbin, right? I tend to be one of those people that, like, I don't sew every day, but when I do sew, like, I want to sit down and sew for a couple of hours. And because I finally am like set up, I'm ready to go, I can do it, I have time. And there's nothing, you know, once I get in my groove, it's such a bummer to run out of thread. So I highly recommend using pre-wound bobbins. I love pre-wound bobbins, and probably this is just because they're so much faster to change. But then also pre-wound bobbins have more, they're able, from the manufacturers, when they wind these bobbins, they're actually able to put more bobbin thread on them than we are able to wind on our home machine bobbins. And so if you're like me and you don't want to run out, it can be really helpful to have pre-wound bobbins. Quilter Select makes some beautiful quilting pre-wound bobbins. There also are, of course, pre-wound bobbins that are made for embroidery, but these are a little bit different. They're designed for if you're quilting or piecing or something. And they have all different colors. You can see, like, this is a set that has all of the basic colors, but they also have them in most of the same colors that match their thread. So you can get, I should have grabbed the matching one, that would have made sense, but I didn't. But yes, you can get the matching bobbin that matches their thread as well. And then they come in both the L and the 15 size. And 15 is like the size that most of the Brothers and Baby Locks take. A lot of the Fofs take the L, but they come in, these are the two most common sizes of bobbins. And so that's also really helpful. And if you're not going to do pre-wound bobbins, then what I highly recommend if you're doing a project is to pre-wind a couple different bobbins in the color that you're going to use. So that way, as soon as you realize, as soon as your machine tells you you're about to run out, or you just run out because you don't have a bobbin sensor that tells you when your thread's going to run out, then you have a bobbin ready to go, and you don't have to take the time to wind it, you don't have to unthread, all of those things. Your bobbin is ready to go, you can just pop it in and be on your way. So those are my tips on bobbins. I'm gonna get a sip of water, and then we'll talk a little bit more about the rest of the Quilter Select products. And if you have any questions, you know, even if you're not watching this live, post it and we will reply to you as quickly as we can to answer your questions. We do love it when you ask questions or when you have feedback and things like that for us. Okay, Quilter Select, the other couple of items from Quilter Select I want to talk about is their, I'm going to just throw things around, I'll pick that up in a second, is their rulers, their rotary cutters, and their mats. So I'm going to just bend down and grab this, sorry guys. Throwing things around today. So what's great about the Quilter Select rulers and mats is that they are designed to work together. So you can see, I mean, we love them so much that like this is our fabric cutting station where we cut fabric for customers, and we use all of their products because they are just our favorite. They work the best. So the rulers here all have this sticky back on the back, so that way they don't slip and slide, right? They really hold firm to your fabric when you're cutting. The other thing is that these markings all line up. And the reason why this matters is when your markings line up, it's gonna be easier for you to cut your quilt pieces straight the first time. Because we know that part of the challenge of quilting is there's a lot of places where we can accidentally, you know, have something to not be straight, right? The first piece is the cutting, right? We need to cut it straight. And then we have to piece it straight, right? And then we have to sew those blocks together straight. And, you know, so there's all of these points. And so if we can start with more precision from the cutting point, it's going to help for the rest of the process. And then the other great thing about these rotary blades is they have this beautiful weight. They're designed for left or right-handed. And because they have this weight, this beautiful weight here, you really don't have to push very hard. You just sort of go right along there and you can just tap it to lock it. You just push this button to unlock it here. But it makes it really easy to use, really easy to keep the guard on so you don't accidentally cut yourself. And you just don't have to push as hard. And then this guy is a little handle. It's called an add-a handle, I think. And the handle is here, so then that way, once again, you do not have to push as hard. You just sort of go like this right along there, and you don't have to have your hand here. You're not worried about getting your hand in the way of your blade. You can just hold on right here, and you can very easily cut without your ruler sliding and without you having to just push down super hard. So we have lots of different, they have this rotary cutter in a 45 millimeter and a 60 millimeter. You can see here that like sometimes we carry them as a pack where you get a mat, a ruler, the rotary cutter, the glue stick, all in one set, all sorts of different options like that. And then this is what the little, it's called the Select ruler handle, there you go. Looks like, you know, if you already have, this works on any cutting ruler. It doesn't have to be Quilter Select, it's just a little suction cup, and it works great. Okay, so let's see what else I have on my table here. A couple more things to talk about. These can be really helpful. They're called machingers, and these are gloves, clearly, that have a little, they're like sticky almost right here. And the idea is when you have, I guess I should have cleaned up my space a little bit. We'll see how much of a mess I can make here. When you are quilting something and you have all of this fabric here, sometimes it feels like it's gonna slide away. And what's great about these little gloves is they add a little bit of grip on your fingers so it can help you keep your fingers where you want them and help you manipulate your large quilt as you're doing quilting. And just, you know, so it's sort of helpful. And these come in different sizes, small, medium, large, extra large, I believe. So they can, you know, you can get ones that fit your hands.
So Carmen, 2 questions.
Yes.
Is the weight of the thread on the pre-wound bobbins okay for regular sewing as well as embroidery?
The Quilter Select ones, yes, they are going to be an 80 weight. They're an 80 weight pre-wound bobbin, and you could probably use them in embroidery as well, and they would be just fine. I think because of how it would look, I wouldn't probably recommend using like the Filtech pre-wound bobbins for your quilting because they, you could try it, but I don't think the bottom's going to look like how you'd want it to look. Where these bobbins are going to look like quilting thread, if that makes sense, instead of like embroidery thread.
And then another question came in is, are the right hand applique scissors available online?
They are. The right hand and the left hand should both be available on the website. As soon as we get off this, we will verify that they aren't hidden for some reason. But they should be available on our website. All of the products that I'm talking about should be available on the website. There's a search bar at the top of the website that allows you to search for things. If you want to search for 1/4 foot, or if you want to search for wave applique scissors, that should pull those scissors up for you. And like always, if for some reason you're on our website and you can't find something, we have a great chat tool that actually goes to live humans. And you could say, help, I'm trying to find this, can you direct me to it? And they will chat you right back and get you some information, or you can always shoot us an email.
Yeah, and I will drop the link in your question after we're done live, so that if you come back to this post, you will see the link to get there.
Awesome. Okay, so we talked about the machingers here. Let's talk about pins. Having pins are super, there's lots of different times that we need to pin things, right? And there's different types of pins depending on what you're doing. These pins right here are also by Alex Anderson. What I really like about this is it has a magnet in here, so you can see like they don't fall out. And I don't know about you, but how many times have you just thrown your pins all over your floor? Because I've done that numerous times. So this has a magnet in here. This is a really fine pin, so it's not going to gouge your quilt with a giant hole that it's going to leave, right? And then these have glass heads. And the reason why you want glass heads, of course, is so that way if you want to do any ironing, you're not melting anything. So this is a handy little pack from Quilter Select. Some other pins that can be helpful for attaching leaders, or if you just want something that's really flat, these flower head pins are really nice for that because they lay totally flat on your quilt. There's no little bump. They are plastic on the end, but for some applications, these can be really handy. Okay, and then there's also times where maybe you don't want to use traditional pins. So here we have the new Peace on Earth OESD wall hanging. This is coming out in October. And I think we're talking about it at What's New, but it's sort of pretty. And I was trying to pick pretty samples to show my stuff off with here. So you can see these are Wonder Clips. And Wonder Clips are super handy. This, of course, has already been sewn. But oftentimes I will use Wonder Clips to hold my binding on. So then that way I can then sew it, and it's super easy to pull them on and off. They're easier than pins. You're not going to stab yourself. You can use them for all sorts of different times when you want to hold things together. And there's different sizes of these Wonder Clips. There's mini ones that are tiny, and there's jumbo that are really big. And I know sometimes people use them in knitting. There's lots of different applications for these, but they are really handy and really handy to use. And they look like, you can get them in a box of 50 like this. There's multicolor ones. There's the all red ones like this, and this is what they look like. Super handy, and those are by Clover. So the other thing that can be helpful is these Wonder Pins. These are actually new. These are designed for basting. And so instead of using a traditional safety pin, this is a new little guy, and you can see I have a couple on here. And the way they just pop out, sort of like a safety pin, but they go in a little bit differently. So they just pop in there. And so it's designed to be so you can go in here and go through here and then just go to the side and it locks on instead of having to flip in. Once you get the hang of it, it's a lot easier on your fingers than a traditional safety pin. And those are called the Wonder Pins. And traditionally, if you were basting something, you would not put them this close, right? I've always thought that the rule of thumb was that you want about a fist between. So that way, and when you're using these, the whole idea is that you have your top, you have your batting, and you have your back, and now you need to pin it together. So then that way you can start from the middle and work out and start the quilting process. And so normally you would put these about, like I put one there maybe, and then another one here, and you want them about a fist apart, so that way it will hold it together, because you don't want your quilt to shift too much in that process.
So a couple of comments have come in.
Yeah.
One is that clips are also great for surgery use. You can use them before they get close to the needle or blades, and you can remove them. Yeah. So that's great for surgery use. And then
great tip.
Leanna said Wonder Clips are great for kids. They for teaching pinning, and save teaching pinning for another time. Just use the clips with kids.
Use the clips for kids. That's also great. Yeah, I love that. Anytime, a lot of times when you use pins, you can use the clips, and then you don't run the risk of sewing through that pin. You don't run the risk of poking yourself, all of those things. So those are great other uses, lots of great uses for the Wonder Clips. Okay, what do I have left on my table here? I think we're almost through most of my goodies. I think I just have 2 more items here. One, I put out these little stash and stores because I love having, I love having the things that I am using really handy and easy to find and not flat on my table. And the reason for that is my table honestly looks a lot like this when I'm sewing. There's just like stuff everywhere, there's fabric, and then I can't find what I'm looking for. And I find having something like this that is close by, that I put like my scissors, my marking pin, the things that I'm gonna use all the time really close to me is really helpful. And plus these are cute and they come in the small size or the big size in all different colors. So let's talk about this pen here that I have. This is the Quilter Select Self-Erase Marker. And it is really great. It has one side where it has a little purple mark and on the other side is an eraser. So you can erase or the line will go away all on its own. And it told me, let me just remember the exact time here. It goes away after 1 to 7 days. So what is great about, what I love using this for is when I need to make a quick mark on something so I can sew it correctly, but then I don't need it for long term, right? This isn't the marker you're gonna use if you're marking it and then in a week later you're gonna come back and finish something. This is like the marker that like you're gonna use and you need to mark it, but then you want it to go away. You want it to go, you can either erase it or you just want it to go away on its own in a couple of days. And this has a great point and an easy little eraser, and it's also designed by Alex Anderson, one of those Quilter Select products, and she has a lot of really great products. We have more of her products in the stores and online. You could just search Quilter Select too on the website if you want to see all the other things that she has, because she has tons of rulers, all different sizes, and mats and all that good stuff. Is there a question?
Yes, what are the organizers, the small size, called?
They're both called Stash in Store, but the small one is the mini. You can see they're mini Stash in Store, and the big one is called Stash in Store. Yeah. Well, let's see. I don't think I have forgotten anything on my table. So here, hopefully you learned a couple of new things. I loved all the feedback. Thank you so much for all the ideas and comments. It's really fun to know how everyone is using these different tools. There's a lot of great tools out there to help your craft. If you want to purchase any of these, of course, we have them in our stores in Western Washington, but you can also just go to our website at qualitysewing.com, and we have a search bar across the top, and you can search that there. There's also a category, I think, called quilting accessories. And like I mentioned before, we do have live humans in the chat or via phone that you can call, and they can answer some questions for you. So happy quilting, and I look forward to talking to you soon.